Before the riot, before the screams, there was routine. Every morning at the New Mexico State Penitentiary began the same way. The sound of keys, boots, and orders echoing down concrete halls. The prison was built to hold 800 men, but by 1980, it held more than 1,200. Cells meant for 2 now crammed in 5. No ventilation. No light. No hope. Inmates slept shoulder to shoulder, breathing the same thick air, rage and sweat mixing into something toxic. Guards were outnumbered 15-1. The warden knew it. The governor knew it. But no one cared enough to stop it. The food was spoiled. Medical care was a joke. And deep inside, gangs ruled the tiers. The Aryan Brotherhood. The Bandidos. The Black Syndicate. Each cell block had its king. Each king had his soldiers. And every day, they waited for the moment the system would break. It didn't happen overnight. Violence in this prison was like a disease, spreading cell by cell, man by man. For months, inmates had been complaining about food, about medical neglect, about being beaten for speaking up. But the real fear wasn't the guards. It was each other. Rival gangs had divided the yard, invisible borders drawn in blood and intimidation. One wrong look, one wrong word, and you could end up cut with a razor made from a toothbrush. At night, the tension was unbearable. The screams from isolation blocks echoed through the concrete. And in the silence that followed, you could almost hear it. The sound of something waiting to snap. Pause, faint metallic clank, heartbeat sound. By late January 1980, it was no longer a question of if it would happen. It was when. Behind every prison door, there's a different kind of law, the law of survival. Inside the New Mexico State Penitentiary, it wasn't the guards who ran the place. It was the gangs. The Aryan Brotherhood ruled cell block 3. The Bandidos controlled block 5. And deep inside, the Black Syndicate carved out its own kingdom in the shadows. They decided who got protection, and who didn't. Who got food, and who starved. Contraband, drugs, even guards, everything had a price. And the warden? He'd long stopped trying to stop them. Some guards took bribes just to stay alive. Others looked away, pretending not to see what was happening. But the gangs, they were planning something bigger. Something no one, not even the most feared inmate, could control. Beat, distant sound of a door slamming. And when it came, it would turn the yard into a battlefield. It began just before dawn, February 2nd, 1980. Inmates in dormitory E2 had been drinking homemade brew all night, whispering about revenge. At 1:30 a.m., a guard unlocked the wrong door. Within seconds, everything changed. Prisoners stormed into the control area, overpowering the few officers on duty. Keys were taken. Radios smashed. Word spread fast through the tiers, the prison's ours. The sound of metal slamming against metal filled the air. Dozens of men broke free from their cells, screaming, running, grabbing whatever they could use as weapons. The lights flickered, then went out. In that darkness, chaos found its voice. Beat, alarms blaring in distance. The riot had begun. By 2 a.m., the New Mexico State Penitentiary was no longer a prison. It was a war zone. Dozens of guards had been captured, dragged into cells, their hands tied as inmates took over the blocks. For the first time in history, the prisoners were in complete control. Cell doors burst open. Inmates poured into hallways, yelling, laughing, crying. Some searching for friends, others searching for enemies. Radios screamed for help, but no one was listening. The control room was gone. The front gate was sealed. And deep inside the smoke and confusion, gang leaders were already carving up territory, deciding which blocks to burn, and which to spare. The guards had become the prisoners. By dawn, the riot had taken on a life of its own. The first wave of violence wasn't about escape, it was about revenge. Rival gangs stormed through the cell blocks, hunting the men who had crossed them. The yard became a battlefield of loyalty and betrayal. Some tried to hide, Others tried to protect their own. But in the madness, no one was truly safe. Smoke filled the air. Flames spread across the upper tiers. The smell of burning plastic and fear hung heavy. For 12 hours, the prison belonged to chaos. And the yard was stained forever. By mid-morning, the New Mexico State Penitentiary had become a furnace. Fires burned in every direction, plastic melting, smoke choking the air. Inmates tore through cell doors, breaking pipes, flooding hallways, using anything they could find to survive. The electricity failed. Water lines ruptured. Guards who had escaped the first assault could only watch from the outside. Powerless, listening to the chaos inside. No one knew who was alive, who was dead, or who was in control. For hours, the inferno raged. And inside the smoke and screaming, something even darker was taking hold. The realization that there would be no going back. Even in the darkest places, there are flashes of light. Inside the burning prison, as chaos spread and blood stained the halls, a few men chose a different path. They had guards in storage rooms. Carried the wounded through smoke-filled corridors. Some opened their cells to protect strangers. Men they'd never spoken to, men they were told to hate. While the world saw monsters. Inside, a few proved that humanity hadn't completely died behind those bars. One inmate later said, "If I was going to die in there, I wanted to die doing something right. In a place built to break men." Compassion became rebellion. When the fires finally burned out, what remained was a graveyard made of concrete. Smoke drifted through blackened corridors. The walls were scarred, the air thick with ash and loss. National Guard units entered the prison, stepping over rubble, broken glass, and silence. Some inmates sat motionless, staring at nothing. Others whispered prayers, too weak to stand. The numbers were staggering. 33 inmates dead. More than 200 injured. 12 officers taken hostage. The scenes inside were too gruesome for cameras to show. And too haunting for those who saw them to ever forget. For 3 days, rescue teams worked through the wreckage, identifying bodies, counting the cost of neglect and rage. When the smoke cleared, the stories began to surface. Inmates. Guards. Medics. Each one with a memory they wished they could erase. One officer remembered hiding under a pile of blankets for 10 hours. Listening to footsteps pass by, praying they wouldn't stop. Another inmate recalled pulling his friend's body from the fire. Some refused to speak at all. The trauma ran too deep. Investigators would later describe the scene as something out of a war zone. And for those who survived, the war never really ended. Many carried those nights inside them for the rest of their lives. Replaying the screams, the smoke, the silence after. When news of the riot reached the public, the state called it a tragedy. But inside government offices, it was treated like an embarrassment. Officials rushed to control the narrative. Blaming violent inmates, avoiding questions about overcrowding, and promising reforms that never came. The governor of New Mexico appeared on television, calling the event unavoidable. But for the families of the dead, that word was unbearable. Evidence surfaced showing that warnings had been ignored for years. Reports from guards and counselors describing unbearable conditions had been buried in filing cabinets. The truth wasn't hidden by accident. It was hidden by design. Beat, soft news static fades out. The system didn't just fail that night. It failed long before the first door ever broke. In the months that followed, investigators tore through the wreckage, not just of the prison, but of a system built on neglect. They found files documenting years of ignored warnings. Letters from guards pleading for help. Reports showing that overcrowding, starvation, and corruption had become normal. Commissions were formed. Speeches were made. And yet, as the years passed, the pattern continued: new prisons, same mistakes. Some changes did come. More oversight. Better training. New security systems. But no reform could erase what happened inside those walls. Survivors called it a lesson written in blood, a warning of what happens when humanity is stripped from justice. And still, that warning echoes. Decades later, the scars of the 1980 riot are still visible, not just in New Mexico, but across the country. The same conditions that ignited that fire, overcrowding, neglect, and desperation, still exist in prisons today. Only now, the violence hides behind policy. Behind locked doors. Behind paperwork marked confidential. Inmates still fight for medical care. Guards still work overtime for little pay. And the cycle continues: anger, fear, silence. But every once in a while, someone remembers what happened here. And the warning echoes through the walls. Never again, they said in 1980. Yet somehow, the system keeps whispering. Soon. Every nation has moments it wishes to forget. But forgetting doesn't heal. It only repeats the pain. The New Mexico riot was more than just a tragedy. It was a mirror. A reflection of what happens when justice loses its humanity. 33 lives were lost. Countless more were scarred forever. The walls were rebuilt, the cells repainted. But the stain never washed away. And maybe, that's how it should be. Because the moment we stop remembering is the moment it can happen again. Beat of silence. This was Blood on the Yard.